A rainy New York evening always had something cinematic about it. The shine of the wet asphalt, the reflection of neon signs, and the endless movement of the streets created the feeling that the city lived its own, secret life. In his penthouse on the 72nd floor of the Orion Tower skyscraper, Alexander Reiner sat, one of the most famous financiers in America. He owned an investment fund that managed hundreds of billions of dollars, and his name was synonymous with power and unshakable success. That evening he returned from another charity reception, where he once again played the role of the philanthropist with a human face. His tie lay thrown on the table, a glass of bourbon glowed in the semi-darkness, and he himself, looking out the panoramic windows, tried to convince himself that he still controlled the world. But a phone call destroyed this illusion. "Mr. Reiner?" The voice on the phone was cold and formal. "This is an FBI agent. We need you to come immediately. It's about an internal investigation into your foundation." Alexander felt something snap in his chest. "You must be mistaken," he replied dryly, trying to hide his nervousness. "My company operates exclusively within the law. Then it will not be difficult for you to answer our questions." The voice cut off abruptly. "We are sending you a subpoena." He dropped the phone as if it had burned his hand. For the first time in many years, his confidence cracked. After taking a few steps across the room, he rested his hands on the cold marble of the fireplace and looked at his reflection in the mirror. "Damn, what do they know?" flashed through his mind. His wife Elizabeth entered the room, an elegant blonde with a look that always concealed ice. "Did something happen?" she asked, noticing how his hand trembled, clutching his glass. "No, just work." He waved it off, although his heart was pounding like it was in a trap. She came closer, looked at him with a long, searching look, and he saw in her eyes what frightened him most: disbelief. That night, Alexander sat for a long time on the balcony, staring at the bottomless lights of the city. In 20 years, he had built an empire, destroyed dozens of competitors, bought the silence of hundreds of people. But now, for the first time, he had the impression that this entire Great Pyramid was shaking. And as lightning split the night sky, he realized his life, as he knew it, had just ended. The federal investigation was not long in coming. Within days, the newspapers were bursting with headlines: Rayner's empire under suspicion, offshore schemes, and shadow investments. Television cameras were watching the entrance to his office. Crowds of journalists were blocking the way to his car. What had seemed an impregnable fortress yesterday was turning into a fragile house of cards. Tension reigned in his company's conference room. Former partners sat in silence, some even avoiding eye contact with him. Finally, Mark Delaney, his longtime associate and CFO, spoke up. "Alex, we need to distance ourselves. I can't let my name appear next to yours in the reports. If this goes on, we'll all be drowned." "Are you serious?" Rayner's voice trembled with anger. "We built this house together." "Yes, but now it's on fire," Delaney replied coldly, and left, slamming the door. That moment was the beginning of the end. One by one, his partners betrayed him. Close friends who had sworn loyalty only yesterday were now signing plea deals with the police, saving their own names. The media was tearing him apart, painting him as a predator who had been robbing the market for decades. The most painful blow came when he spoke to Elizabeth. She sat across from him in the living room, calm and emotionless, as if she had been preparing herself in advance. "I'm filing for divorce," she said, looking through him. "I'm not going to drown with you." "Liz," he didn't recognize his own voice. It was so fragile. "We've been through it all together. You've been through it. And I've just watched you turn into a monster." Her words cut deeper than any accusations from the prosecutor's office. And when the door closed behind her, he felt alone. The following weeks turned into an endless cycle of interrogations, court hearings, and mocking headlines. His reputation was crumbling before his eyes. An empire worth hundreds of billions was melting away like smoke. But the biggest shock was the information he accidentally received from his lawyer. Among the evidence against him were documents signed by his own brother, Nicholas, the man he had once entrusted with starting a business, the one who had always been in the shadows. "It's him," Alexander whispered when he saw the familiar handwriting. "He betrayed me." And in that moment, he felt that he had lost more than just money or a name. He had lost his foundation, the belief that at least someone was on his side. The darkness had engulfed him. The city, which had recently applauded his strength, now looked upon him as a fallen king. Rayner's world had shrunk to a few rooms in an old hotel where he hid from the cameras and the paparazzi. Once his face had been on the covers of Forbes and Time, now it was on every tabloid with the caption, "King of the Crooks." One by one, his lawyers were dropping their cases. Everything seemed over. He sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, when he heard a knock on the door. He opened it and couldn't believe his eyes. There stood before him a young woman in a plain coat, her eyes piercing. "Don't you remember me, Mr. Rayner?" she asked. "My name is Claire Davis. I was an intern in your office in the early years." He squinted, trying to remember, but he just shrugged. "And what do you want now? To see me wallow in the mud?" She sat on the edge of the chair, pulled a thick folder from her bag. "I have documents that prove that part of the case against you was falsified. But there's something else." She opened the folder, and his heart nearly stopped. On the table lay contracts, reports, and bank transfers. Some of them he had never seen before. They testified to something much deeper than his own dealings. Behind his back, an entire network had been operating for years, an international scheme involving politicians, bankers, and even intelligence agencies. He was just a face, a cover, while the real players remained in the shadows. "Where did you get this from?" He looked up at her, his eyes full of suspicion. "My father worked in the compliance department. He died under mysterious circumstances after gathering evidence. I finished his case, and now I need an ally." Alexander was silent for a long time. His pride and habit of trusting only himself screamed that this was a trap. But inside, for the first time in a long time, a spark flashed. "Do you understand that if this is true, we are going against those who never lose?" His voice was hoarse. "Do you understand that you have already lost everything?" She answered quietly. "You have only one thing left, a chance to restore the truth." He took the documents and flipped through the first pages. What he saw changed his world. All those years he had considered himself a predator, a king in the financial ocean. But the truth was worse. He was just a pawn in the game of much larger and more dangerous forces. And when he raised his head, his eyes were no longer the same as before. They had a purpose. "Okay, Claire, if we are already in hell, then why not burn this whole house down?" The world no longer seemed familiar to Rayner. Claire showed him documents that exposed not only his brother Nicholas, but also a circle of people who had controlled political decisions through financial flows for decades. This was something much more than just a fun scam. This was a system built on lies, corruption, and the blood of those who tried to resist. He could do what he always did, negotiate, pay, buy his way out. But this time the option was different. If he made a deal with the investigation and revealed part of the truth, he could save the remains of his fortune, get a suspended sentence, and hide somewhere in Europe. If he went all the way, revealed all the documents, and named the real masters of the game, he would lose everything. He could be imprisoned or simply wiped off the face of the earth. In the hotel room, he was silent for a long time, sitting opposite Claire. She waited, not taking her eyes off him. "Do you want me to become a martyr?" he asked bitterly. "You don't understand. I've been running away from poverty, from humiliation all my life. Money is not just a piece of paper for me. It's the only thing that has ever proved to me that I'm worth something. And now you say, give it up, go against the world that I built myself. And what have you really built?" Her voice was as hard as steel. "A cage. For yourself and for millions of others. You've become part of their game, Alexander. But you can take a step that no one else can. You can be the one who breaks this cage." He felt anger and despair mingle inside him. The image of his brother who had betrayed him appeared before his eyes. The image of Elizabeth who had left him without any regret. The image of his partners who had laughed behind his back. And then he realized the choice had already been made. The next morning he entered the courthouse with a folder in his hands. The journalists erupted in screams again, but this time he didn't walk like a driven beast. His posture was straight, his steps confident. At the hearing, when the prosecutor began to read out the charges, Reiner unexpectedly asked to speak. He was allowed to, and he unfolded the documents. "Do you want to know the truth?" His voice echoed in the hall like a hammer blow. "Then listen." He named the names of senators, bankers, international corporations. He showed that his empire was only a window for a much darker machine. The judges turned pale, the journalists recorded every word. A storm arose in the hall. Alexander felt that he was crossing the point of no return. But for the first time in many years, he did not run away. He challenged. And when the guards hurried to take him away under escort, he smiled. Because he knew, now the game had truly begun. The prison cell was cramped and cold, but for the first time in many years, Alexander Rayner slept peacefully. His name became a curse for some and a symbol of truth for others. After his testimony, a scandal erupted in the country. Several senators lost their mandates. Large corporations were investigated. Even high-ranking FBI officials were forced to resign. The same system that he had served all his life was now devouring itself. And although he himself was found guilty of financial fraud, he remained the central figure of conversation in all media. For some, he was a traitor to the elite who dragged his colleagues to the bottom. For others, a man who had the courage to challenge. One evening he received a letter. A simple envelope without a return address. Inside was a sheet of paper with a few words. You gave me reason to believe. K. He held the letter in his hands for a long time, and a feeling arose in his chest that he had not known since his youth. Hope. As he walked in the courtyard, he watched the sun set behind the wall. One question echoed in his head, which now haunted him every day. Is it possible to be rich and honest? He realized that the answer was not so simple. You can have money and lose yourself. You can lose everything, and for the first time find the truth. His fate was sealed. He would never regain his empire. He would never be able to become a king again. But he had left behind something more than wealth. He had left doubt in the hearts of those who followed the same path. Perhaps this was my true victory, he thought, rising from the bench and looking up at the sky, where the first stars were breaking through the latticework. His story did not have a happy ending in the classical sense, but she left behind a question that everyone had to answer for themselves. Which is more important, truth or success? And can you redeem the past when your name is already written in history in blood and gold?